Hello. Today's stream is going to cover how to configure and manage VBO from start to finish, including configuration of credentials, and kind of some ideas of how to create jobs with best practices. First, we're going to start off with a little presentation on some of the numbers that have come through for Office 365 in the past few weeks. First Office 365 has 2 million users, and there were 12 million users added in just 1 week to this group. So it's expanding, and due to current situations, it is increasing significantly. There are an endless number of use cases for the software for remote workers, but we have to be very mindful of the types of harm that these remote workers can do to that environment coming from remote devices like a laptop or phone that's not currently patched or patched to the most recent release can kind of open up your credentials to attacks or security breaches. Even home routers don't usually have a firewall behind them. So there's any number of factors that are increased for security risks to this type of data with the remote users at home, and especially places that still have public Wi-Fi and access, just a breeding ground for all kinds of attacks. We are concerned for data being lost for any number of reasons. Whether it's an accidental deletion, your retention policy through Office 365 not being exactly what you expect it to be, both internal and external threats for like malicious inside users, disgruntled employees, and then your external like rogue applications and ransomware. Again, these come into a greater factor when we're working on all these remote devices. Another thing that some companies don't quite consider when moving over to this product is making sure that you're still meeting your legal and compliance requirements for data retention and any type of legal reasons that you may need to keep that data. And then again, managing a hybrid environment and doing migrations from on-premises to off-premises is another reason that you may look into options for securing this data. In most cases, customers believe that Microsoft Office 365 is protecting their infrastructure and keeping records of that data that is on that infrastructure for you to be able to restore back anything you need, anytime you need it. But unfortunately, that's not really the case. Microsoft Office 365 is responsible for redundancy in your current data, the hardware that's underlying that data, and all of the networking to get to that data. Now, the data itself is actually in the responsibility of the customer in this model. This is what Microsoft calls the shared responsibility model. This model encompasses all of their cloud offering, not just the software as a service, but also platform as a service and infrastructure as a service. This chart in the blue sections show what you are responsible for as an end user. And when we're dealing with Office 365, this is software as a service. So you're responsible for the information, what devices are logging into the information, the accounts and identities, meaning the usernames that you've given out to your end users. Now, you kind of split the responsibility for identifying those users. You're responsible for your end user being able to identify themselves, and Microsoft's responsible for making sure that infrastructure is available to authenticate with. From there, they protect the underlying application like the Exchange or SharePoint and the access to OneDrive. Make sure your network's up, the underlying operating system, and of course that physical hardware. So Microsoft is great at making sure you have fault tolerance zones, you have update zones, you have geolocated information if required or requested, but they're not responsible to make sure and the integrity of that data is still good. Now, there is a hard delete and a soft delete when it comes to Office 365. Office 365 will keep everything for a soft delete for a specified retention period. For most of those, as you can see here, they are up to 30 days, but by default, it's actually only set to 7. So if you've never configured or worked with your deletion policy, then you're only protecting your data for up to a week back, and then up to 30 days. Then this enters into the cycle of what we call a permanent or hard delete, meaning you're not going to be able to get that data back. What we've found in the industry is that within that time frame isn't when you realize your data is missing. It's the 140 days mark. So this data is already gone and you're requiring to be able to restore it. Whether it's for a e-discovery process, a terminated employee suing, or even just a contract file that you thought you had saved on your machine locally so you deleted it from your OneDrive. Any number of reasons this data could have been deleted, but usually it's 140 days later, give or take some, that you realize that data is gone. And Microsoft's not required to make sure that data is still there for you. Not only are we talking about retention when it comes to a software that you look for Office 365 backups, but the set of features that software adds, the flexibility in your choice, what kind of innovations, and by innovations meaning extra features that allow you to either access or restore your data, and how easy it is to use. And then scaling. You need to have a backup software that is going to scale with you, because Office 365 is continuously adding data points for you to be able to collaborate with both internal and external sources. So we can only expect that data to grow, which means you need a backup software that's going to allow that data to grow. And then, of course, integrations. What are you compatible with? We allow you to use any type of storage that we can get a connection to, any physical storage. And we're also S3 compatible, meaning you can send your data off to object storage, which allows you to have an infinitely expanding repository. Not only do we look at offering cloud like Office 365 and SaaS offerings, but the breadth of service, meaning that the software not only covers one type of environment, but it's a suite of environments. So we cover physical infrastructures, virtual infrastructures, and cloud infrastructures. These 6 data points is what is considered by the industry to look for in your backup software for an Office 365 environment. And this is just a bullet point list of how we can assist with that and what we offer to meet these standards. So talking about the backup of the software is just as important as talking about how you can restore your data. If you don't have flexibility in how you can restore your data, you're locked into data format types, being able to access the data you want it, the way you want it, where you need it is extremely important to the backup software. In our case, over our 3 explorers, we're able to offer 25 different types of restore options. And not only do we restore the raw format of this data, but we restore it in ways that make sense in the format of where we're restoring it back to. So, example, Exchange Online, we're able to export that file as a PST or an MSG file. We can restore back to the original location. We can restore back to a new location, whether that's on-premise or in the cloud. And we offer that same flexibility with all of our explorers. Taking a look at the Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365 environment, our software, we're able to back up not only your in the cloud environment, but also an on-premises environment and in a hybrid configuration as well. we're able to send your data to either a local storage, whether it's an iSCSI Direct Connect or a drive in a physical server, or we can send that data off to object storage. We're compatible directly with several named vendors: Amazon, Microsoft Azure Blob, IBM Cloud, and we're able to use anything that's S3 compatible. Now, there is an additional feature that we're able to leverage with Amazon S3 storage, and that's something called infrequent access. The infrequent access tier allows us to send data up to the storage and store it for a much lower cost over time. There is a slightly higher cost in restoring any of that data, but you'd want to check with your vendor for exact numbers on that. And then we offer the 3 Explorers, one for Explorer for Microsoft Exchange, Microsoft SharePoint, and Microsoft OneDrive. Whenever you restore these, you can even send data back to an email address. So instead of having to download that data locally and then move it over to the computer that you want, you're able to restore it anywhere you need to. Now we're going to kind of shift gears and head over to the lab environment now that we kind of have a base of what the software is. And we're going to start with a configuration. So this is a completely unconfigured setup of Veeam Backup and Veeam Backup for Microsoft Office 365. And we'll start with the infrastructure adding permissions. Whenever we start to configure an account to add these types of permissions, you do not need to license that account, meaning you can create an additional backup account that you don't have to worry about that additional license. So from the administrative portal is where we'll start. And if you don't already see it, you can hit show all and you can see all of your admin center portals. We're going to want the Exchange and the SharePoint Center, as well as the main administrator portal. I've already opened up the 2 additional on the screen. So we'll go ahead and get started in creating a user that we're going to use for backup. And we'll hit add user from active users. And need to give it a name. We'll leave it at the default. We're going to let it we're going to create a password. And next. We can create it without a license from this very next screen right here. And it will need an administrator role. And the administrator role that this account needs is the SharePoint administrator role. So we'll hit next. Make sure all of our information is correct. Alright, let's see if we can log into that account, and we can do that from office.com. Sign in. And we can see that user is definitely active. So now we can come back over to the administrator portal, and since we already have SharePoint Admin Center open, we're going to check the access control. Now we do need apps that don't allow modern authentication, so we need to allow that access, and it's under Policies, Access Control, and apps that don't use modern authentication and allow access. Now that we've created the user, we'll need to assign it some some Exchange admin roles and permissions. So from the Exchange Admin Center, we can come over to permissions. It's already highlighted on administrator roles, and we will want a permission group. I recommend creating a permission group separate for this account. So once you've created the group, it'll populate a screen like this. Or hit the add button, it'll populate a screen like this. You'll name your group. You'll add the permissions, which is going to be application impersonation, mailbox search, view only configuration, and view only recipients. Then you'll add your member that you need, and we'll try to find the account we just created. Sometimes can take a few moments to populate over, but we'll see if it lets us. There is a slight delay in the sync between the Admin Center portal and the Exchange Admin Center, so if you don't see the user you've just created right away, give it a moment. It should populate. So while we're waiting for that, we can come back over and check that the user's here. Alright, we will be testing this out with the modern authentication option, so we'll go ahead and create the application group while we're waiting for this to load. That'll be from your Azure Active Directory portal. I generally go into All Services, and we're looking for applications registrations. We already have an application group here for this account, but we'll go ahead and create a new one. And we'll do that. And under API permissions is where we want to be. We can go ahead and delete anything that's already here if you want to, but we'll go ahead and add the permission for Microsoft Graph. Make sure it is an application permission and not a delegation permission. Delegated permissions won't work to be able to add this into your console. And we'll want read all directories and read all group. And we'll add that permission. That's for our Microsoft Graph. Now we'll go ahead and add that same type of permission but for SharePoint, and we'll need to make sure it's an application permission, and we need full control all. Hit add, and then we'll add the permission for Exchange. It's all the way down here at the bottom. Make sure it is the application permission again. We'll actually give it full access as app. See if we can search. There it is. And now we can create a client secret. Now you can name the description whatever you want. And we'll need this for later. So we'll go ahead and copy this over and save it in a notepad for now. And we'll name this app, and we'll create a username and password for the user in a moment. Once you have the password created, you can come up here to Overview, and you'll get your application ID as well. And we'll copy that over. And I'll make sure everything is granted. And consent has successfully been granted. Now we can come back over to Exchange to see if that user's populated for us now. There it is. If you double click on any user, it'll automatically add it to that field, and we'll hit OK. Now in order to use the modern authentication, we'll go ahead and enable two-factor authentication on this specific account. So select the user, should be able to enable the multi-factor authentication, and we can actually search again here so we don't have to scroll through everything. Select the account and hit enable. Now we will have to relog in under this user to enable that two-factor authentication. So we'll log out. And log back in. It's going to require additional information. We're going to have it send a code. And we'll go ahead and block this out because it's going to require me putting in a phone number. Alright. And now we are done. And stay signed in. Now we can generate additional application credentials under my account. under security and privacy and additional security verification. There it is. It's under a subsection now. So we'll create a new application password and we'll name it appropriately. Copy that and put it within our password and save the file back, and we can head back to our machine now. And we have our password copied over. Now our username is just going to be the username for this user. So when adding in the organization, we'll select Add Organization at the top. It's going to be a fully Microsoft organization. We're going to use the modern authentication. Now this is where that application ID comes into play. So we'll go ahead and copy over the application ID. And then we will copy over the password we generated, which is the secret. This is the username of the account we created. And then we're going to need the application password created. And hopefully all of the permissions have already flowed over, otherwise the connection may fail to one of these services. Microsoft Graph does have a slight delay sometimes when spreading permissions throughout the environment, but so far it looks good. And it's done. So that's everything that you need to do to set up modern authentication for a user. And again, this requires no license for you to be able to do so. So now we can start to take a look at your components. First of all, we're going to take a look at the backup infrastructure. The backup infrastructure, we have our proxies. These are our data mover services that move data from the Office 365 environment to whatever you specified as a repository. So all repositories are attached to a proxy. In this case, we have the default backup repository, but we're going to go ahead and add in an object storage. We'll select add and we're going to do object storage. And we happen to be working with an S3 storage. Credentials are already correctly configured. We'll select a data center. You'll select what bucket you would like to send data to, and then you can make a new folder. And name your folders appropriately so you can remember what they were next time you need them. Then you can hit finish. That's all you need to do to add in an object storage. And then from that object storage, you can add a repository. So this is going to be an object storage repository. Repo. Now it's going to have you select a local cache. This local cache is so that we can store metadata locally and be able to pull up the files for the file structure that's on the object storage faster than going out to that object storage and querying for that data. So we'll go ahead and add a new folder here so we know what it is. And we're just going to call it object. And hit OK. And then we can select offload your backups to the storage. We'll select our object storage. And we will enable encryption because that's just a good idea. Now, if you do lose this password, there is no recovery for this. So try to keep track for the password. Now the retention, between your item level retention and a snapshot based retention policy. And again, with the object storage, you're able to use that archive tier with the Amazon S3 storage if you choose. And from here, we can create a job. Now, creating the job is fairly simple and straightforward. You, of course, create a name, and then you can add any scope you want, whether it's a user, a group of users, specific sites, or you can even select your entire organization. And then from there, you can kind of drill down into what specific objects you want to backup in each of these jobs, whether it's the mail, the OneDrive, or the sites. It's great if you already have groups throughout your organization for like finance, HR, or IT, and you want to separate those out into separate repositories. You could make different groups for each of your different sides of your org. Or if you have specific users you'd like to back up, that's also where you can select it here. In this case, we're not going to back up the entire organization. We're just going to find a user, and we're going to throw my name in there, see if we can find mine. This is the account, and we'll just get that one and add. And we'll only back up email in this case. Now, the exclude list is just as dynamic, where you can select groups of users or individual users and sites. So if you select an entire group, but you know there are 6 users that you don't want to process in this backup, it may be easier to go ahead and select that entire group of 100 users and exclude only 6. And we'll select the object storage as our repository. Now, creating the job and scheduling can be very dynamic as well. You can either run it based on a schedule, or you can set it on a periodic interval. If the interval is smaller than the amount of time that the job takes to run, it'll automatically just keep kicking off the next job run once the last one has finished. And we'll go ahead and start the job and let it run here. Now, this is all of the components within the console, but there is some additional reporting which can help make anyone's job a little nicer. And one of the big ones is knowing if you're backing up all of your users. So we'll go ahead and generate this report. It's going to give us a detailed list of, compared to our organization and our backups processed, who's being protected in the last 30 days. And in this case, it's telling me that I have 52 unprotected mailboxes. It'll tell me if I did have any protected, it would list those protected mailboxes. But then we come down here and it'll even list the mailboxes that are not being protected. So if you're missing a user, it'll tell you where you're missing that user at. And coming back over here, we have a couple more reports. One of them is your storage consumption, so you can stay on top of if one of your repositories is running out of space. And the license overview is so you can tell who and who is not being licensed based on the backup. From here, we're actually going to head over to a server that I have a lot more configurations on and take a look at some of the extras that we have present. First of all is going to be your history section. You can take a look at all of your job runs, whether it's a backup or a restore, and then some of your management jobs if you've added or removed something from the console. Another great thing to look at is going to be under your general options and setting up your notifications. This is to let you know whether your jobs are succeeding. You can suppress them until the last job run. Even for warnings and failures, depending on if you just want to be notified when something's gone wrong down here. Some other great features in the general options are going to be selecting contacts and calendars out of the retention policy. What this will do is if you had a contact that's created from 3 years ago, but you only have your retention set to a year, we'll go ahead and back up all of your contacts regardless of how old they are and how old your calendar far goes back. So you don't have to worry about refreshing your contacts or losing any of your contacts because you have older contacts in your list. For the internet proxy, this is something that you would configure if this server itself or any of your proxies don't directly have access to the outside world to be able to get to the Office 365 environment, which could be very useful in cases where you have to be very strict on what you're allowed through your network or into your infrastructure. And of course, updates, you want to make sure that you are completely up to date. And if you plan on working with the RESTful API, that's also within here. Actually, let's take a look at these job configurations. I have a couple types of job configurations here where I've split off my Exchange, OneDrive, and SharePoint into separate jobs so that I could send them to separate repositories in my infrastructure. One reason I did this is because Exchange data tends to be a lot more static because of the limitations on the file sizes that can be sent through email, versus SharePoint or OneDrive, where there's very little limitations on how much data can be sent to these data sectors. I mean, most organizations have a user can have up to a terabyte. So if you have several users using terabytes and terabytes of data, you may see an explosion in one of your repositories, but you don't want to move all of your infrastructure data. Maybe you just want to move your OneDrive data to something that you can expand. That's a good way to sector off your jobs in this case. We also have the object storage, and I've added in a couple different sectors to the object storage. So say if I want finance to go to one sector and maybe HR to go to another sector, so you could separate billing to see how big that object storage and how much of that object storage is being taken up. Makes the IT job just a little bit easier. Now, all of our Restore Explorers look very similar to give you an easy look and feel. So you don't have to worry about how to find your data, how to search for your data. And we'll go ahead and open up all three. Whenever you open up by the organization, or if you click on the organization and launch one of these Explorers, it'll go ahead and try to do the restore based on all of the jobs that are configured for this organization. If you know specifically you only need data from maybe your SharePoint job, you can come up here after you've clicked on the job and you'll see since there's only SharePoint data on this one site, it's only giving me the option for SharePoint restores. And here's Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive. They look very similar. Looking back and forth, you can barely change or see what changes except for those icons. Here is the data store for the Exchange Explorer. You can path down to any user that you would need and be able to find any email that was sent back and forth on that repository. Our advanced search allows you to search by over 100 different fields with the ability to specify different conditions and contact information to make looking for like an e-discovery process very seamless. If you need to search for a contract ID that was only sent by a certain user within your organization or to and from that user, you're able to specify all of those within this category field here, and it would display below and allow you to export only that data that you need for that e-discovery process. If you ever need a Teams type of conversation, you're able to come into your conversational history under the email folder and you have a Teams chat folder. This is anything that user is sent through Teams or been sent to them from Teams for a conversational between two people. Coming over to the SharePoint Sites, we can come down here and take a look at a personal site, which you can see your contacts and documents, but you can also see your team sites for any group conversations that you have and any documents that were exchanged within that team site. So if we come down here to site documents and the content here and general, we can see an image that was sent within that Teams conversation, and we can even open up that file to see what was said. And if we come over here to Teams and Site Documents, we can see that was that message in the Teams console itself. And we can restore that if we need to back to the original location if it was removed from files. Now we're unable to restore it so that it goes back in the post field, but that's due to a limitation of an import API into that console. Coming over to OneDrive, it's a lot like working through a file system and folder, and we can see all of the documents here. And that's pretty much everything that you need to know to get started with the Office 365 console itself. A complete kind of permissions setup configuration. And we can come back over here and take a look. So not only do we offer the paid edition, but we have a community edition, meaning that you can back up to 10 users and a terabyte of SharePoint data completely for free, and that never expires. It's kind of our offering to the community. It's meant for home use. If you have a home lab that you're working with Office 365, this is a great option to be able to work with the software, try out the software, and see if it's something that you would want to implement into a business setting. Now, if you want to try unlimited users, you can download a free 30-day trial from the website, and you can back up as many users and as much SharePoint data and test the software to your environment to make sure it's going to do what you need it to do. Next week, or not next week, but the week after next, that Friday, me and Dave Russell will be on here covering transport modes and data portability and kind of how it's grown throughout the years and how important it is to have that many different types of transport modes. Thank you for coming on.